My name is Jasper Walker. I never thought I'd be telling this story. The day began like any other Tuesday morning, but ended with me seeing things no living person was meant to see. This is my testimony of what happened when my heart stopped on that operating table for 15 minutes. I remember the pain first. A searing white-hot stab that started in my chest and radiated outward until my entire body was consumed by it. I'd been having some discomfort for weeks, brushing it off as indigestion or stress from my job at the architectural firm. My wife Emily finally convinced me to see a doctor after I collapsed while mowing the lawn on Sunday. Widowmaker, the cardiologist called it when he saw my test results. A 98% blockage in my left anterior descending artery. The main pipeline feeding blood to the largest part of my heart was nearly completely closed. I needed emergency surgery. "We'll take good care of you, Mr. Walker," the surgeon promised as they prepped me for the procedure. Dr. Bennett was her name. She had kind eyes above her surgical mask, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I could be so calm in that moment. Emily squeezed my hand before they wheeled me away, tears in her eyes. "I'll see you soon," I told her. I had no idea how prophetic, and yet inaccurate, those words would be. The operating room was freezing. I remember shivering as they transferred me to the narrow table. The anesthesiologist was a young man with a thick beard and glasses who spoke in soothing tones. "I'm going to give you something to help you relax now, Mr. Walker. Just count backward from 10 for me." 10, 9, 8. The ceiling tiles began to blur, the bright surgical lights dimming around the edges. 7, 6. I never made it to 5. What happened next defies all logic, all science, all rational explanation. And yet it was more real than anything I've experienced in my life before or since. There was no transition, no tunnel of light like you hear about in other stories. One moment I was counting backward on the operating table, and the next, I was suddenly aware that something fundamental had changed. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. For weeks, there had been this constant pressure in my chest, but now it was gone. I felt weightless, unrestricted, free in a way I'd never experienced before. Then I realized I could see the operating room from above. I was floating near the ceiling, looking down at the chaos unfolding below. My body, my actual physical body, lay on the table, chest exposed, while Dr. Bennett and her team worked frantically. Their movements were urgent, their voices sharp with tension. "We're losing him," someone shouted. "BP's dropping. No pulse. Starting compressions," another voice responded. I watched with detached curiosity as they performed CPR on my body. It was the strangest sensation. I could see myself, yet I was also watching from outside myself. I felt no fear, no concern, just a peaceful awareness. "Clear," Dr. Bennett called, and everyone stepped back as they applied the defibrillator paddles to my chest. My body jerked violently on the table, but the monitor continued its ominous monotone. "Again, clear." They shocked me 3 more times, but nothing changed. The line on the monitor remained flat. I heard Dr. Bennett say something about cardiac arrest, and someone else mentioned the time, 9:42 a.m. I was fascinated by the scene below, but not connected to it anymore. It felt like watching a movie where I happened to know one of the actors. That body wasn't me anymore. I was here, floating, observing. "Jasper." The voice came from behind me, warm and resonant. I turned, or whatever the equivalent of turning is when you no longer have a physical body, and saw him. I knew instantly who he was, though he looked different from the paintings and images I'd seen throughout my life. His skin was olive-toned, weathered by the sun. His hair was dark brown with subtle waves, and his beard was neatly trimmed. He wore simple white garments that seemed to glow from within. But it was his eyes that captured me completely. Deep, penetrating eyes of an indescribable blue-green color that somehow contained all the wisdom and compassion of the universe. Jesus. No introduction was necessary. No explanation needed. I knew him, and somehow I understood that he had always known me. "Lord," I whispered, though I had no physical voice. He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Take my hand." he said, extending it toward me. I hesitated only for a moment, glancing back at the operating room where they continued to fight for my life. My wife was waiting outside. My children would be devastated. I had so many unfinished things. "It's not what you think," Jesus said gently, seeming to read my thoughts. "Come." I reached out and took his hand. The moment our hands connected, the operating room vanished. We stood on a hillside covered in the most vibrant green grass I had ever seen. The blades were perfect, each one visible to me in stunning detail. I could feel them beneath my feet, cool and soft. I looked down and saw that I was barefoot, still wearing the hospital gown, yet I felt no embarrassment or discomfort. What struck me immediately was the quality of the light. Everything was bathed in a brilliant white radiance that should have been blinding, but somehow I could see more clearly than ever before. My senses were heightened beyond anything I had experienced on Earth. Every color was more vibrant, every sensation more intense. "Where are we?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The outskirts of the heavenly city," Jesus replied, his voice resonating through me. "I want to show you something." As he spoke, the white brilliance surrounding us seemed to shift and part, like curtains being drawn aside. What was revealed took my breath away, if I had still needed to breathe. Stretched out before us was a landscape of indescribable beauty. The hillside where we stood was dotted with flowers, unlike any I had seen on Earth. They were small, delicate blooms in soft pastel colors: lavender, pink, yellow, and pale blue. What was remarkable about them was that they appeared to be dancing, swaying in perfect harmony, though there was no breeze. They moved with purpose and joy, as if each one was a living entity celebrating its existence. At the bottom of the hill, a vast valley spread out, partially obscured by what looked like a gentle mist or cloud. Rising from this mist were the spires and domes of an enormous city that extended as far as I could see. The structures were made of materials that seemed to both absorb and reflect light: pearlescent walls, golden domes, and crystal spires that caught the light and scattered it in prismatic patterns. At the center of the city stood a magnificent structure with a massive golden dome that dwarfed all the others. It radiated light from within, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "The temple of the living God," Jesus said, following my gaze. Beyond the city, on the far side of the valley, rose a majestic mountain covered with trees. But these were not ordinary trees. Each one was perfectly formed, with foliage of the deepest, richest green I had ever seen. They stood in perfect symmetry, neither too close together nor too far apart. Above it all arched a sky painted with colors no earthly sunset could match: deep gold near the horizon blending into crimson, then violet, azure, and finally a deep sapphire blue at the zenith. But the most astonishing sight was the light. From somewhere beyond my field of vision, beams of pure, living light shot across the landscape. They were like elongated tubes of radiance, about 2 feet long and glowing with a brilliant white gold luminescence. They moved with purpose and intelligence, soaring through the air in graceful arcs and patterns. As I watched, fascinated, one of these light beams approached me directly. Before I could react, it passed through my forehead and into my being. The sensation was extraordinary, a warm, gentle vibration that filled me with indescribable joy and peace. Knowledge and understanding flowed into me like water, though of what exactly I couldn't quite grasp. More of these beams of light crossed the valley, striking the trees on the distant mountain. When they made contact, they exploded into thousands of smaller light particles that cascaded down like a glittering waterfall of diamonds. Soon the entire mountain seemed alive with dancing lights. "What are they?" I asked in wonder. "The glory of the Lord," Jesus replied simply. "What you see are manifestations of the Holy Spirit moving throughout creation, bringing life and knowledge." As he spoke these words, I felt my knees weaken. I fell to the soft grass, overwhelmed by the majesty of what I was witnessing and the presence of the one beside me. "Lord," I whispered, "why have you brought me here?" Jesus knelt beside me, his eyes full of compassion. "To answer the prayer of your heart. You have asked to know the truth, to see beyond the veil. I am showing you what awaits those who love me." It was true. Throughout my life, even during times when my faith wavered, I had always harbored a deep desire to know what lay beyond death, to understand the reality of heaven. I had prayed for this understanding many times, especially after my mother passed away 5 years earlier. "There is much more I could show you," Jesus continued, "but this glimpse is sufficient for now. You will return to tell others what you have seen." Return? The idea filled me with an unexpected sadness. How could I go back to the dull, limited world after experiencing this? Jesus smiled, understanding my reluctance. "Your time has not yet come, Jasper. There is work for you to do, people who need to hear your testimony." He extended his hand and helped me to my feet. As I stood, another beam of light approached, larger and more brilliant than the others. It hovered before us, pulsating with energy. "This messenger will guide you through the city," Jesus said. "I will rejoin you later." The beam of light moved closer, and somehow I understood that I was to follow it. As we began to descend the hillside toward the misty valley below, I looked back at Jesus. He stood watching, his form now seeming to radiate light from within. The light beam led me down the hill, through the dancing flowers that parted to make a path for us. As we approached the mist that shrouded the lower part of the valley, I expected it to feel damp or cool, but instead it was warm and embracing, like passing through a gentle curtain of the purest silk. When we emerged from the mist, the city lay before us in all its glory. The buildings were unlike any earthly architecture. They appeared to be constructed of living materials that shifted and changed subtly as I watched. Some walls seemed made of pearl, others of crystal or precious metals, but all glowed with an inner light. The streets were paved with what looked like gold, but it was transparent, like clear glass infused with golden light. There were no shadows anywhere. Light seemed to come from every direction at once. As we moved through the streets, I became aware of other beings around us. Some appeared human, dressed in flowing garments of white, while others were clearly not of human origin. Beings of light and energy that shifted form as they moved. All radiated joy and purpose. Nobody seemed surprised by my presence or my hospital gown. Several of these beings nodded to me in greeting as we passed, their faces alight with welcome. I felt known and accepted in a way I had never experienced on Earth. My guide led me to a large open plaza at the base of the central Golden Dome temple. The plaza was filled with beings gathered in what appeared to be a celebration. Music unlike anything I had ever heard filled the air, complex harmonies that seemed to resonate not just in my ears, but throughout my entire being. It was as if every molecule of my existence vibrated in harmony with these celestial sounds. In the center of the plaza stood a magnificent fountain. But instead of water, it flowed with what appeared to be living light, the same radiant substance as the beams that had crossed the valley. The light spilled over the edges of the fountain and ran in channels throughout the plaza, creating patterns of incredible complexity and beauty. My guide brought me to the edge of this fountain. I knelt and, following an impulse I didn't understand, dipped my hands into the flowing light. It felt substantial yet weightless, cool yet warm, a paradox of sensation. As it flowed through my fingers, I was filled with a profound sense of peace and clarity. Knowledge began to flow into me, not as discrete facts but as complete understanding. I understood that what I was experiencing was not just a place but a state of being, a reality where the presence of God permeated everything. Heaven was not simply a destination, it was relationship and communion with the Creator, unfiltered by human limitations. As this understanding filled me, I became aware of another presence approaching. Looking up, I saw Jesus walking toward me across the plaza. The beings around us bowed their heads in reverence as he passed. He sat beside me at the fountain's edge, his eyes reflecting the flowing light. "What do you think of my Father's house?" he asked. "It's beyond anything I could have imagined," I replied honestly. "But I have so many questions." Jesus smiled. "Ask. The people here, are they waiting for something? For the end of time?" "Time as you understand it does not exist here," he explained. "What you perceive as waiting is actually being. Those you see are fully present in this moment of eternity, experiencing the fullness of communion with God and with one another. And the light? I asked, watching as another beam crossed the plaza above us. You said it was the glory of the Lord, but what does that mean? It is the active, living presence of God, His thoughts, His will, His love made manifest, Jesus said. These messengers carry His intentions throughout creation, sustaining all things by His power. I looked around at the beings in the plaza. Are these angels? Some are what you would call angels, beings created to serve and worship God. Others were once as you are, human souls now transformed into their true nature. In my Father's kingdom, all created beings find their purpose and fulfillment. As He spoke, I noticed something remarkable. From Jesus Himself, threads of light extended outward, connecting to every being in the plaza and beyond as far as I could see. These threads pulsed with life and energy. What are those connections I see coming from you? I asked. What you see is the bond between Creator and created, He explained. Every soul is connected to me, sustained by my life. On earth, many do not see or acknowledge this connection, but it exists nonetheless. Here, it is visible and celebrated. I thought about earth then, about my family, my unfinished life. Lord, if I go back, how can I explain any of this? Words seem so inadequate. Jesus placed His hand on my shoulder. You will not explain, you will testify. Share what you have seen and experienced. Some will understand, some will doubt, but the seeds you plant will bear fruit in their time. He stood and extended His hand to me. There is one more thing I want you to see. As I took His hand, the plaza and the city around us faded. We stood now on the mountain I had seen from the hillside, among the perfect trees. Up close, they were even more magnificent, each leaf distinct and perfect, the bark smooth and vibrating with life. Jesus led me to a clearing among the trees. In the center stood what appeared to be a large book on a pedestal of living wood. The book was bound in material that shifted and changed as I looked at it, sometimes appearing as gold, sometimes as parchment, sometimes as pure light. This is the book of life, Jesus said. Every soul that has been or will be created is known here. He opened the book, and I saw pages filled with names written in living light. The names moved and shifted, some glowing brighter than others. Jesus turned the pages until He came to one particular page. Look, He said. I leaned forward and saw my name, Jasper Walker, written in script that seemed to pulse with my own heartbeat. But around my name were hundreds of other names, connected to mine by fine threads of light, forming a complex web of relationships. These are the souls your life has touched and will touch, Jesus explained. Every person you encounter, every life you influence, the ripples of your existence extend far beyond what you can see. I stared in wonder at the interconnected web of names. Some I recognized, family members, friends, colleagues. Others were completely unknown to me. This is why you must return, Jesus said gently. Your chapter is not complete. There are those who need what only you can give them, your testimony, your love, your unique reflection of my light. As he spoke, I became aware of a pull, a gentle tugging sensation drawing me back. The book, the mountain, even Jesus Himself began to fade slightly. It's time, He said. Remember what you have seen. Remember that I am with you always, even when you cannot see me as clearly as you do now. Will I remember this? I asked urgently, feeling myself being drawn away. Will it be clear to me when I return? Jesus smiled. You will remember what you need to remember. The experience will remain with you, though some details may fade like a dream upon waking. But your heart will know the truth. The tugging sensation grew stronger. The heavenly landscape was fading, the colors dimming, the light receding. Lord, I called out, suddenly afraid of losing this connection. Will I see you again like this? I am always with you. His voice came, though his form was now barely visible. And yes, when your true time comes, I will be waiting to welcome you home. Those were the last words I heard before everything went dark. There was a moment of disorientation, a rushing sensation, and then, pain. Intense physical pain flooded back into my awareness. My chest felt like it was being crushed. My lungs burned as they struggled to draw breath. I heard voices, urgent and surprised. "We've got a pulse. He's back. BP rising, heart rate stabilizing. Mr. Walker? Mr. Walker, can you hear me?" I forced my eyes open, the bright lights of the operating room harsh and artificial after the living light I had experienced. Dr. Bennett's face hovered above me, her eyes wide with shock and relief. "You were gone for almost 15 minutes, she said. "We thought we'd lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat was parched, my voice weak. One of the nurses held a small ice chip to my lips. After moistening my mouth, I managed to whisper, "I saw him. I saw Jesus." Dr. Bennett and the other medical staff exchanged glances. I could see they thought it was just the rambling of a brain deprived of oxygen, hallucinations from the medications. "Rest now, Mr. Walker," Dr. Bennett said kindly. "You've been through a lot. We'll talk more later." As they prepared to move me to recovery, I closed my eyes again, not to sleep, but to hold on to the memory of what I had experienced. The hillside, the city, the mountain, and most of all, the presence of Jesus himself. I knew with absolute certainty that what I had seen was real, more real than the hospital room around me. And I knew that my life would never be the same. The recovery period after my surgery was physically challenging, but spiritually transformative. For 3 days, I couldn't speak about my experience without being overcome by emotion. When I finally told Emily what had happened, tears streamed down both our faces. "I believe you," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "I've always believed there was more than what we can see." The medical staff had their explanations, of course. Dr. Bennett gently suggested that what I experienced was a product of my oxygen-deprived brain, a common phenomenon during cardiac arrest. The anesthesiologist mentioned that certain chemicals released during traumatic physical events could create vivid hallucinations. But I knew what I had seen. The memory remained vivid, pulsing with life and truth. The colors more vibrant than any earthly palette. The sensations more real than anything I had experienced before or since. And those beams of light, the glory of the Lord, continued to appear in my dreams, reminding me of the reality that exists beyond our limited perception. More than anything, the face of Jesus stayed with me, those eyes that saw through to my very soul, filled with love beyond measure. I had been in the presence of truth incarnate, and that knowledge transformed everything. As my body healed, I found myself noticing the world around me with new appreciation. The morning light filtering through my hospital room window became a pale reflection of the heavenly light I had witnessed. The flowers Emily brought took on new significance as I remembered the dancing blooms on that heavenly hillside. I started keeping a journal, recording every detail I could remember about the heavenly city, trying to capture in words what was beyond language. I sketched the landscapes, the buildings, the beams of light, though my artistic abilities fell woefully short of the reality. My perspective on death was forever changed. I no longer feared it, though I wasn't eager for it either. I understood now that what we call death is merely a transition, a doorway into greater reality. The connections I had seen in the Book of Life gave me a new appreciation for every encounter, every relationship. Each person I met might be one of those names connected to mine, a soul I was meant to touch in some way. Most importantly, my relationship with Jesus was transformed. No longer a distant figure from ancient texts or Sunday sermons, he was now someone I had met, spoken with, walked beside. His words, "I am always with you," resonated in my heart during both joyful and difficult moments. The memory of those beams of light, the glory of the Lord, moving through creation, reminded me daily that God's presence is active and alive in our world, even when we can't perceive it. Sometimes, in moments of deep prayer or quiet contemplation, I could almost sense them again, just beyond the veil of physical perception. I don't know why I was granted this glimpse of heaven. Perhaps it was indeed to answer that childhood prayer, that deep longing to know what lies beyond. Perhaps it was to strengthen my faith for challenges yet to come. Or perhaps it was simply a gift of grace, an unmerited blessing from a God who delights in revealing himself to those who seek him. What I do know is that I was forever changed by those 15 minutes when my heart stopped beating. I had been shown a reality that exists alongside our own, separated only by the thinnest of veils. I had walked in the heavenly city and seen the face of Christ. And in that face, I had seen the truth that underpins all existence, that we are known, we are loved, and we are never alone. This is my testimony. This is what I know to be true. Heaven is real, more real than anything we experience in this shadowland we call life. And Jesus, not as a concept or a historical figure, but as a living, present reality, waits to welcome each of us home. I saw him. I spoke with him. I walked beside him in the heavenly city.